Hi, I'm Untitled and welcome to The Craft of Living. It is great to be back after another week. I'm again very excited about this episode. I think it's deeply relevant. Well, I hope that all episodes that I've done so far that I've recorded have been meaningful and significant, but this one, especially in the times we're living, really has a special sort of significance attached to it, and I will share about it in a moment. But for now, let me just give you a couple of updates, and I perhaps should also say that there is a reason why I have this first part of every episode, which I'm calling updates or life updates, not simply because I want to be self-indulgent or I want to share things that I think like everyone needs to know. It's not really about that. It is more about specificity and context. All these episodes that are taking place, all the themes that I'm pursuing, they're happening within the context of my life. I have, new insights, I'm reading books, things are happening in my environment that provide the proper spark, I would say, then for the things I eventually share. So by me sharing both the insights and the struggles that I am going through, I hope that that will be helpful to my listeners, but also, again, provide some sort of a framework for the topics that I'm dealing with. So one thing that I've been going through is a book by Belden Lane, Backpacking with the Saints, Wilderness Hiking as Spiritual Practice. I referred to Belden Lane before the fact that a number of years ago when I attended the American Academy of Religion, this huge gathering of religious scholars and philosophers, about 14,000 people coming together in a pre-COVID era. I remember one day just stumbling upon a session and listening to Belden Lane. I didn't know who he was, but I was just taken in by his talk on spirituality and desert spirituality. Desert spirituality primarily refers to the spirituality of the desert fathers who lived mostly, in the Egyptian desert in early Christianity, running away from society, and then also serving eventually, some of them as advisors and counselors. Some of them lived in complete solitude. Some of them lived in communities. And I think he talked about that, and I really, really enjoyed that. And so I picked up this book, and again, as before, me mentioning a book does not mean a full endorsement. It doesn't mean that I fully subscribe to the ideas of any of the authors that I quote. I think that goes without saying. And it also applies to Belden Lane, who deals with a number of different spiritual thinkers or mystics or writers. And then what he does with them, he kind of interweaves their ideas with his backpacking experience. He writes about these wonderful adventures, experience in the wilderness, experiences that he had. And then his custom where he would take, let's say, one of the spiritual classics with him, right? Thomas Traherne or, John Climacus, Thomas Merton, whatever. And then how the environment and how the beauty and the power and the danger, the starkness of nature would accentuate certain aspects in the writings he would take. And by accentuate, I mean bring in certain dimensions that he would not have access to, perhaps, had he read them in a more domesticated environment. So that's the one relationship, how nature impacts his reading, and then how his reading opens him up to appreciate nature in a new way. And that was for me quite interesting when I read it this week, when I listened to it this week. I both read sections and also listen to an audiobook. And he makes the note, I never thought about that before, how we have to think about Augustine's conversion. where Augustine is in a garden and he picks up this scroll, this book of Romans, and starts reading chapter 13 and then has this great conversion, something that I talked about in my episode on Augustine. And but one thing that we don't ask is, where did he read it? Right? He did not read it in a busy street. He did not read it in a church. He was not surrounded by friends. No, he was in solitude. As a matter of fact, Augustine also narrates conversion experiences of his friends, particularly one friend who picked up the book, The Life of St. Anthony, written by Athanasius, which then led him also to a conversion experience, how that was done far out of the city, right? So context really matters. Reading Psalm 19 is going to be very different if you read it, obviously, in some beautiful natural environment than in a room without windows and with neon lights on. And for me, that was something that is kind of obvious, but made me think about the context. Where am I reading these writings, right? So perhaps taking a book and reading it in nature, in some either cold environment, hot environment, surrounded, let's say, by beautiful trees or facing mountains, that environment will, again, as I said before, accentuate elements, bring out elements that you would not otherwise get. For me, that relationship then between nature and reading and the body and the location of the body when we read this, I found this to be quite moving. What else happened this week? Well, I think in the past when I had my series on the New Year's resolutions, where I talked quite a bit about habits, the formation of habits, I mentioned the importance of time tracking. Now, for some people, tracking time might seem to be overly just crazy, right? Why would you have this obsessiveness about recording everything? But I have to tell you that if you pick up any of these exercise programs, just actually on this side of the house, we have our small makeshift, gym. Actually, it's just a room. And if you go there, you will see, my P90X and P90X, I think, 3. My wife has this program called Brazilian Butt Lift, which I always tease her about. Like, what a cringy title is that? Until I did it once, and then 2 days after, I was not able to walk. Just my glutes were just gone. I mean, it was very intense exercise. But what all of these programs have, they want you to keep track. To keep track, how many, things you can do, how many pull-ups or this, whatever you do, for you to see progress. And for you to be aware, like, what's happening. Are you doing it the right way? So tracking for the purpose of awareness, for the purpose of adjustment of your exercise regime, I think is very important. And so the question is, why wouldn't you want to do it with time? And I mentioned last time that I have an app on my phone called A Tracker. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, I can even show it to you, and I have these kind of different categories, and then when I do something right now, it says CL, Craft of Living. I actually time how much all of this takes when I do my research, when I do my exercise and all of that. It's not to obsess, but it is to be aware, and you will be surprised just how significant a change that can lead to once you're aware of the time that you're tracking. So I have this book that talks and promotes this. It is a book by Laura Vanderkam, 168 Hours. She also has this podcast called Before Breakfast, where every day she has this very brief, very simple, but often very useful strategies for living. Right? I would say it's kind of her version of the craft of living. And so that was the first place where I encountered her talking about time tracking. So I will provide some link in the episode descriptions, which then also leads me to encourage you to always look at the episode notes, because there I provide all the links, the books that I mention, like the blog articles, the blog posts that I have that connect with a particular episode. I provide links as well. And perhaps for those of you who perhaps are willing to support the craft of living, there's also a link there. So, there are good resources in those notes. And I will provide a link both to her book and perhaps her, description of how to start time tracking. And, you can do it with an Excel sheet. You can do it in other ways. But give her some try. Listen to her arguments if you're not convinced by what I'm saying, and perhaps you will see the wisdom of doing it at least for a while. So that's what happened this week. I kind of recommitted myself to time tracking, and I have, very, very useful for me. It's incredibly useful. When I do my research and my work, I have for a certain project, I note down the minutes that I've spent per day on that thing, and then I can do month by month comparison, season by season comparison, and try to see certain patterns and perhaps have some improvement. Yeah, so that was kind of for me this week. Another thing perhaps just to recommend, and I will provide also a link for that, I read an excellent article by Adam Grant, and whenever Adam Grant speaks, I really listen to him carefully. If you don't know who Adam Grant is, just go Google, find out. But he wrote an article in the New York Times, The Science of Reasoning with Unreasonable People. And then his kind of basic idea is, don't try to change someone else's mind. Instead, help them to find their own motivation for change. And so he talks about in this article, how he had a friend who is anti-vaccination, and then how he tried to convince him, and those kind of butting of heads doesn't lead anywhere. As if you're a Trump supporter and you talk to a Democrat or vice versa, you have the same experience. And so what he does in that article, he talks about motivational interviewing, where instead of trying to convince people, which is very hard, actually you trying to force people to change their minds, as will make them even more entrenched in what they believe. So rather than to make people change, which again, as I said, is often so very hard, engage in a motivational interviewing. Try to find out the motivations that people have for believing what they believe. Right? It's so easy for those who are on the liberal side to dismiss Trump supporters as bigoted white supremacists, then in fact there are so many different reasons why people supported Trump. Disenchantment with neoliberalism, globalization being one of the reasons, which is kind of a different topic. But so having motivational interviewing with people can help us understand them. There actually can be a greater chance for people perhaps to change their perspective. So these are some of the things that happened this week, some of the insights, some of the thinking. And I think that was, for me, all of these things have been quite significant. But now, this is all I wanted to share. And now it's time for our episode. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard about the movie The 12th Man, which tells the story of Jan Bolsrud. So Jan Bolsrud was part of the Norwegian resistance during the Second World War, and a lot of things happened, and he was on a boat with other sort of resistant fighters. The Germans found out about it, attacked them. They all jumped into the very cold, sort of icy Arctic waters. They were all captured, 11 people were captured, but Jan Bolsrud was able to run away by swimming through a frozen kind of stretch of water. And first, the Germans, they didn't believe that anyone could survive in freezing temperatures. As you know, if you drop into a 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit sort of environment, water, you can survive about 15 minutes, perhaps a bit longer, but eventually up to 45 minutes. Eventually, you will die from hypothermia. But he was able to survive, and he started running away from the Germans, completely wet, I mean, the story is absolutely crazy. At one point, he was caught by an avalanche, and the avalanche he survived that, and he was entombed alive for about 4 days. He eventually found some villagers, and then the villagers, I mean, crazy things happened. At one point, I think he was dropped off at a spot where some Norwegian fighters or some people were supposed to pick him up, but they couldn't come because the region was surrounded by the Germans, and so he was for 27 days just waiting in snow for someone to pick him up, and almost died of hunger. At one point, he ended up in a cabin where he noticed that his feet, his toes, they were frozen, and he was afraid of gangrene. And so he took a knife and cut off 2 of his toes. Absolutely unbelievable. Eventually, he was able to escape to Finland, where he was picked up. But when you see the movie, but even more if you just read about him, it is astonishing what he survived. How was he able to have such a degree of resilience or mental fortitude? And then there are many other stories, and you know them. I know you have probably a stock list of people, stories that you know of people who have survived unbelievable adverse circumstances. You know David Goggins going through Hell Week 3 times, the notoriously difficult Navy SEAL BUDS training, the phase in BUDS. And he went through it 3 times, because 2 times he had to go out because of injury and other factors. Oh, think about the legendary monks of Mount Hiei in Japan, who have this thing, who kind of put themselves to this absolutely excruciating endeavor of running 1,000 marathons in 1,000 days. Right? Actually, not many have succeeded in doing so. I believe that in the last 130 years, only 46 of them were able to do that. And so they kind of space it out more. But just unbelievable example of fortitude and resilience. So think about Kilian Jornet, certainly one of the greatest, if not the greatest ultra distance runner today, and one of the greatest of all time for sure, who ran in 26 hours from the base camp on the Tibetan side of Mount Everest to the 8,848 meter summit. That is, if you know anything about how long these things take, that is an unbelievable achievement. Or perhaps, I don't know if you know the story of Jean-Dominique Bauby, who got a stroke and suffered from a locked-in syndrome, which is this condition where you understand everything, your mind works, but you cannot move any part of your body. But he could, and the only thing that he could move was his left eyelid or the right? I think it was the left eyelid. And what he did then, he basically dictated his memoir by just winking. And so people would show him the alphabet and go A, B, C, and when they came to a letter that he wanted to use, he would wink, and then they would know. And just think about how long it takes to write a book by winking individual letters. So these are just some stories, of people with unbelievable fortitude and strength. I mean, you can think about people like, Nelson Mandela, who survived it in the prison with such a positivity, Gandhi, who was involved in the struggle for independence from British rule in India, and so on and so forth, so many different people. And it is not surprising that this is actually a trait that is universally applauded. Right? I don't know of any culture in which having strength, having courage, having resilience is not valued and promoted in some fashion. Now, you might have heard, we are kind of enamored with these kind of, the Nordic countries in Europe, somehow thinking that all the best things must come from, Norway or Denmark or Sweden, whatever. And so it is not surprising that, hygge was this Danish word of coziness, comfort, and you can kind of find it out what hygge means. There's also a word that comes from Finland. It's called sisu, right? And it refers to this extraordinary determination, courage, resoluteness in the face of extreme adversity. And I think a great example of that is when the Finns in their fight for independence were facing the Russian army. Now, I'm sorry, my history, my dates might be a little bit, the Winter War, I believe it's in 1938, but I stand under correction. My knowledge of history has a little bit abandoned me at this moment, but it was around that time. Again, it is, the point is though that resilience and mental strength is universally valued. You might be familiar, if you like athletics, with the fact that some of the greatest achievements in long distance running have been done by Kenyans and from a specific Kalenjin tribe. I hope I pronounce it the right way. But what very much interested me, I listened to some of the runners talking about the initiation rites the boys have to go through, So the night before, they make you crawl naked, right? Mostly naked through a tunnel of African stinging nettle. Then they take you the bony parts of your of the ankle, right? And they beat you on that, and they beat you on the ankle. They beat you on these bones. They tie them together, and then, sorry for saying this, but then they take like this extract of the stinging nettle and put it on your genitals. And then the following day, then they have this very painful way how they do circumcision, which just makes you just, faint by thinking about that. But the interesting thing is, in some of these versions of these rituals, they put a mud cake on your face, and where the mud is allowed to dry. And the whole point is that you have to go through all these experiences without showing outwardly, any pain, right? You have to accept all of this absolutely stoically and unflinchingly. And so the idea is, if your mud sort of cake cracks, it means that you have expressed pain. And there's actually, if you have this crack, you're then being stigmatized by the whole community, right? So these are, again, crazy examples of not just fortitude, but how many cultures consider instilling fortitude to be absolutely important, right? But of course, we don't have to think about these extraordinary individuals, because there are countless people, firefighters, nurses, athletes, servicemen and women, teachers, all kinds of people who are showing this quality of the spirit on a regular basis. And I'm thinking of a friend of mine, right, who has this this chronic disease that has profoundly upended his life. And that not once have I heard him complain about that. I have, my aunt who in the final hours of her life really going through just excruciating pain because of the cancer she had, not complaining at all, but calling me and lifting up my spirit. My wife who exhibited just extraordinary persistence in many difficult circumstances. So there are many people, ordinary people, quote unquote ordinary people, who have exhibited and shown this quality of resilience and grit and perseverance. And so that needs to be celebrated and it needs to be recognized. Now, of course, if you're at all familiar with this topic, you will know that in the last couple of decades, a lot of studies have been done on resiliency, trying to explore to what degree resilience is a matter of genetics, and on the one hand, and socialization and personal growth on the other. And as with many other things, including happiness, it has to do with both. Just some people are just wired in a certain way because of their personality, because of how their psyche works. They just have more resilience and more fortitude. If you watch the documentary Free Solo with Alex Honnold and his climb of El Cap, what really struck me in that documentary is where they put him in this machine, was an MRI machine, but that they were kind of measuring his brain activity, and they showed him images, like some scary images of shipwrecks and whatever. And then they measured his reactions in the amygdala. And you could see, like normal people, when they were shown these images, that region of the brain kind of lit up. You can see kind of red dots there. You look at his brain, there's nothing. And obviously to do this endeavor that he did, you just have to be, you cannot be a normal human being, right? You have to have a certain kind of psychological and mental wiring, right? So this is a lot of studies have been done on that. But the important thing is, right, that we do know that resilience or mental fortitude is a greater predictor of success in life, in college, than just raw intelligence. Like people who have that quality, like people who are able to go on and not give up and have the ability to hope and look at positive outcomes, will simply achieve more and will be actually, in the end, I believe, also more fulfilling human beings. But what is this, right? How do we define these different traits? Dr. Clow has written, I believe it's David or Peter Clow, has written a kind of his 4C model of mental toughness. And it includes control, commitment, challenge, and confidence, right? Challenge is this ability to reframe events in a certain way that you don't see them as life-crushing, but as opportunities for growth. Commitments is kind of the persistence and the pursuit of goals that you have. Control has to do with emotional regulation, and then obviously confidence, we know what that means, right? And so there are different other models out there. This week, I got a book by Rich Divine, and he is, if I can just read briefly here at the back, he's a retired Navy SEAL commander. He's spent 20 years in the SEALs and completed more than a dozen overseas deployment. He just an really interesting guy. He came out with this book, The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. And it's quite interesting, how he makes a distinction between attributes and skills. It just came out, I think the book just came out, I believe January 26th or something like that. And when I opened the book, I noticed that he has one of the attributes, he kind of clusters them, these 25 attributes. He clusters them in 5 different categories. The grit attributes, the mental acuity attributes, the drive attributes, the leadership attributes, and the team ability attributes. And he uses them as kind of ingredients, again, of optimum performance. And in the grit attributes, he has the following one. He has 4 characteristics. Courage, perseverance, adaptability, and resilience. And I found this to be quite interesting. And that speaks very much to how I understand this. And because who of us can really deny that this is very important? And even though we use different terms to describe this quality of the spirit, right? We all know what we're talking about. I prefer to talk about mental fortitude. Sometimes I use the language of self-discipline, but I'm talking about this kind of all-encompassing kind of combination of attributes, of character states, if you wish so, of tendencies that contribute to this encompassing image of being a mentally strong person. I personally even believe that when Nietzsche writes about the overman, right, the Übermensch, he's not talking about some crazy proto-Nazi mass murderer. He actually talks about an individual who has perfect self-mastery. And this was really a matter of great appreciation for Nietzsche. So when I think about, and I wrote this in one of my blog posts, when I think about this quality of mental toughness, I first of all think about the aspect of self-control. Right? Self-control is a person who is able to manage impulsiveness, procrastination, or going for instant gratification. Right? So that's self-control, not giving in to the easy route, not giving in to things that you know are not good for you. Now, how we acquire that, it's a whole different story, but certainly the Bible puts a big premium on self-control. We have self-control in the list of virtues that Paul has in Galatians 5:22, where he writes about the virtue of self-control is mentioned there. And then you have it also in 2 Peter chapter 1, where self-control is mentioned. And actually the term for self-control is enkrateia, which was for some of the philosophers in the ancient world the most important virtue. Often Socrates talks about enkrateia and self-control as being the foundation of all virtues. Interestingly enough, you have another place in the New Testament where we find the word enkrateia, and it is in 1 Corinthians 9:25, which says, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. So here enkrateia has to do with strict training, which of course includes the notion of self-control and kind of being focused on what you are doing. So enkrateia is very, very important. As a matter of fact, you see some of the Jewish philosophers around the time of Jesus, right? When they write about the superiority of the Jewish way of life, they mention that it is superior because it is characterized by self-control and the ability to measure and control one's anger. So then when you look, for example, then the martyrdom of Stephen in Acts chapter 6, who he has complete, not just this kind of visionary experience that he has, but complete of composure on the one hand, and the crowd being angry and violent. That depiction is meant to be an indictment of them being morally deficient people because they lack self-control and because they cannot control their anger. So self-control is incredibly important. And I believe that any understanding of mental toughness, this ability to self-regulate, which is more a term you will see in psychology, is absolutely essential. The second ingredient of mental toughness, the way I understand it, is resilience. The ability to deal with emotional upheavals, difficulties, even tragedies. A resilient person will kind of show a measure, both a measure of equanimity, right? Not necessarily that you don't have emotional perturbance, but that you're able to observe those emotions from a certain kind of distance, not allow yourself to be overwhelmed by them. And then also a certain kind of elasticity, being able to bounce back very quickly from adverse events that have affected you adversely. So that would certainly be one element, resilience. like continuing, bouncing back, not self-pitying yourself, but continuing. I think that would be one element. Number 3 would be flexibility. Like you have everything planned out and something unexpected happens. Do you bemoan your luck or do you adapt very quickly? How quickly are you able to adapt to new challenges and new situations? I think that's another element. Perhaps number 4 would be just grit, right? I mean, that's what we often mean by mental toughness. The ability to pursue your goals, to persist and persevere and not give up. And that is when I mentioned that resilience or grit is a better predictor of success than intelligence. I mean, that's what I had in mind. And of course, the scriptures, they're talking about it, in many places. One of the famous verses is James 1:12, where it says that blessed is the man or blessed is the woman who remains steadfast under trial. And so the kind of certain blessedness, the promise of flourishing is being connected with the person who is able to stay firm and not give in under no circumstances, right? That is certainly an element of mental toughness. Courage would be another part, not the absence of fear, but being able to deal with fears. Number 6 would be a growth mindset, where you see setbacks as an opportunity to grow. I shared with you just in the other episode my experience with having all the rice on the floor, right? And how confronting and then needing to collect all of that and having a mindset in such circumstances. Say, oh, awesome, here I have another opportunity to grow. Good, fantastic. A great instance for me to develop some more resiliency, to develop some more mental fortitude. And I think that having that attitude can be extremely important. As a matter of fact, in Romans chapter 5, 3-5, we have this idea that we rejoice in our sufferings, we rejoice in our trials, in our misfortunes, in the problems that we have. Why do we rejoice? Because we know that suffering produces endurance, which is another word perhaps for grit, right? And grit produces character. And very interestingly, the character, which is built on endurance, on grit, coming as a result of suffering, that character produces hope. It is out of that fortitude that we are then able to have hope. And notice how that's being developed. Not with some magic infusion of these kind of qualities. No. You go through difficult things. You do not give in. A certain kind of character is being formed. And that then gives you the ability to be profoundly realistic about what's going on. That's, again, a combination of people who have mental fortitude or who have self-discipline, that they are very realistic about all the garbage they're going through, and yet at the same time are able to have hope and do not give in. As it says in my motto of my school in Croatia, like dum spiro spero, I will not, until I breathe, as long as I breathe, I will not give in. And I think, okay, I stand under correction, but I believe that dum spiro spero actually is also a motto of one of the states in the U.S. South Carolina, perhaps? Anyway, I might be completely wrong, but I think that I've noticed that. Isn't that like a good motto to have? And finally, I would say number 7 would be life affirmation. Like, for me, a person who has moral fortitude is not just a person who is just going through all of this with clenched teeth, but who also nurtures a certain positive perspective on life. It's a person who is able to affirm goodness and beauty even in moments of tragedy. So it has to do with positive self-regard and all of that. So these are for me elements of resilience. And then the next episode, I will share perhaps some of the strategies, like how can I develop this? Can this be developed? Can I do this in my own life? As a parent, can I instill this in my children? As a Christian, if you happen to be a believer, how can I have more resilience and not give up? And perhaps for all of us to hear the message that we need to hear. Don't let go. Right? Don't give up on the relationship. Don't give up on your goals and projects. It doesn't matter that you failed so many times. Don't give up. I just will not give up. Dum spiro spero. I will, as long as I breathe, I will continue to go on. And but how to achieve this and how to go about it, perhaps more about this next time. So thank you so much, as always, for listening. I wish you to live resilient and strong lives. I hope that all of us can grow into this quality of the Spirit in this year. And in the meantime, blessings and live well. Until soon. Bye.